Okay, so our topic tonight is Byzantine iconography, the symbolism, and early history of the church. And we're going to be doing a discussion on early Christianity, because a lot of people think it was, well, we're always fighting like gladiator games, and then all of a sudden we're accepted as a religion. And remember, this is not to proselytize tonight. This is a historical lecture. Why we're looking at this is the intersectionality of religion and history as part of a Western civilization course. We will be doing further lectures on other faiths. We're going to be spotlighting the Sikh religion at some point. We're going to be spotlighting the Catholic, Protestant faiths, Judaism. How many of you know that we have a synagogue in Muskegon? A few of you do. Good, good, good. Many people don't know that. So we will be exploring all of those things. All right, so let's set the time. Rome, the Roman Empire, from 32 AD to about 800 ACE, and we say ACE, that's the new AD, it's after the Common Era. Make it more secular, same thing. Rome at its height, as part of the Roman Empire, really was composed of what today would be 25 different nations, modern nations, if we were to lay them on a map. 40 different ethnicities and cultures would have been part of that, which is amazing in terms of the size. Going from west to east, from Spain to Syria, essentially from almost Germany down to North Africa. One of the largest spanses for an empire ever noted. And it was very interesting because Rome had gone from a period of being a representative republic to now being an empire, which is a fancy word of saying dictatorship, run by Caesars and a cult of personality. So one of the things we want to look at is militarily, economically, and culturally, how did Rome deal with faith? And how did it merge? And here's an idea, just to give you the sense of the span of how large we're talking. Spain, of course, to the west, Syria to the east, Germany to the north, and then North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, modern-day Egypt. Any further south, you're dealing with a desert anyway. One of the things we want to know is, secularly, the language, the governing language, or what we call the language franca, was probably Latin in the West, but more people in this empire probably spoke as a first language Greek. And you're going to say, well, why Greek? Well, it goes back to the fact that a few hundred years before, a Macedonian by the name of Alexander the Great had laid down the first empire. And there were some successive kingdoms after Alexander's death, including the Seleucids, the Ptolemaic, and the Antignode kingdoms, that dominated essentially this portion of the empire. Building on the concepts of philosophy, the arts, mathematics, they had pretty much taken the intellectual component. All the good things about academics probably came from the Hellenistic world and were embellished upon by the Romans. When the Romans conquered the Greeks and Macedonians, the most prized slaves were, of course, from Greece and Macedonia, and they were imported back to Rome. So it wasn't that they were foreign to them. Probably the best analogy today is what we see as the influx to our nation of people from Latin America, South America, and the predominance that we're seeing with the Spanish language creeping in and becoming part of American culture. Now, other things that we're going to have to take into account. The Romans were smart. And I have a little rule I tell my students. Now, they get tired of hearing George's rules or Mr. Mandates' rules. But one of them is never fool with somebody's religion. People will tolerate a lot. You can fool with their economy. You can goof around with their governmental rule. But when you play with a person's religion, all you're going to do is irritate them. People don't like to be told what to believe. And when you push on people, what happens? They believe it even more. And they're going to show you how devout they are. And we usually can tell in periods of oppression, and you look at this, how this worked even under the communists of the last century, how they were clamping on religion, but yet people still continued to cling to their faith even if they had to do it in, what? Secret. And it became a rallying point for them to keep their faith and their faith traditions alive. The Romans usually didn't fool with people's religions. They had a definite respect for other people's cultures and religions. That's what made them good occupiers. But they kind of violated that. And where it came into play is when they dealt with the Jews. The problem is, kind of like politicians today, revenue. They always needed more money. These Caesars were definitely spenders. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about some of these guys and some of the things they did, but they spent money like it was going out of style. Nero, we're going to talk about Nero, decided he was going to steal the treasures from the Temple of Solomon. Now, back in the day, in the Jewish faith, you made sacrifices. It meant you bought sheep, doves, other animals, which you gave a tribute to. And the priests, the Essenes as they were called in the Jewish faith, would cut or sacrifice the animals in exchange for not only the price of the animal, but a slight fee, a service fee. And that money went into the temple. The temple was like a bank. A lot of wealth was sitting in the Temple of Solomon. Nero decided he needed it, looted the Temple of Solomon, and irritated his Jewish subjects, who rose up. And there was precedent for this, because the Jews had risen up prior to this. Judas Maccabee had risen up against the Seleucid Greeks, Antiochus, and thrown the Greeks out. In Palestine, prior to the Romans conquering them, they were a free society, free of occupation. However, this just caused a big problem when the Jews did it to the Romans, because this caused a 2-year war. The Romans eventually put down the Jews, and as part of the penalty, guess what? Tore down the Temple of Solomon. Today you go to Jerusalem, the only thing you see about the Temple of Solomon is one wall that remains. It's called the Wailing Wall or West Wall of the temple. Still a sacred place in Judaism. But for many people, the Romans didn't fool with your religion. If you're a Greek and you believed in Zeus, they didn't mess with you. If you believed in the cult of Isis, they didn't fool with you if you were Egyptian. Or if you believed in the cult of Dionysius, they left you alone. As long as you paid your taxes, you respected Roman authority, and once in a while you made a sacrifice to the Roman gods, you're okay. That's the way it worked. Left you alone. Took care of you. However, people sought to escape from the day-to-day troubles of life through their local religions. Roman rulers were terrible people, very miserable people. And you got to remember that most people, unlike today, were confined to a territory about 60 miles around. Well, that would be like Muskegon County. I think, Muskegon may be part of Kent County or Oceana County or Ottawa County. 60 miles isn't far, but back in those days it was, because you went everywhere by what? Walking. Horses cost money. Most people don't have money for horses. Maybe they have money for a donkey, which they use to pull stuff. Horses were usually an item for pretty wealthy people, because you have to feed a horse. The lifespan or life expectancy of most people around this period averaged about 35 years. Wasn't really long, although we got a lot of people that did live much, much longer, and there's recorded records of them. Average person didn't make it. Life was tough. So people often had miserable experiences. Well, what changed? Well, we know there was the entry of a person called Jesus. Around 4 BC, this person was born to a humble carpenter and his wife. And you kind of know the rest of the story. Hailed as a son of God. His works were well documented. Teaching, preaching, parables, miracles, all sorts of things were performed, and performed in front of people. We have records, written records of some of this. Now, unfortunately, Jesus met a violent end. He was persecuted, put to death. And this is where faith comes in. According to the stories, 3 days later, resurrected. And that resurrection and being hailed as the Son of God, part of a Trinity, is the basis of what we call today Christianity. But what are the major themes of Christianity that made it so appealing in a time when people were violent, were despotic, were miserable? Well, one, love one another. Well, that was almost, you would think, normal, but it wasn't. People were easily affronted. It was all about them. Adherence to the golden rule. Do unto others as you want done to you. God being omnipotent, being all present, omnipresent, always there. Loving and just, as opposed to the Jewish God that's often retributive. In the Jewish faith, if you didn't make sacrifice and kept in the good side of God, what happened? Floods, plagues, lots of bad things. And the afterlife is a big thing. Because for many people, sweating in a field in the hot sun, being miserable, eking out an existence, that doesn't seem like a very productive, fruitful life. How many of you have often wondered, what is my purpose on this earth? I don't know. I always have that question. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. When I was 20, I had no questions. I had all answers. I had every answer. My students could tell me. They have all answers. And I tell them I have all questions. So that makes us a good pair. I can get their answers to my questions. And this idea of salvation being able to reconcile for a life that extends beyond here that won't be miserable. Those are central tenets. Now, think about these things. How does Christianity spread itself? If you're only confined to most of the works of Jesus being in an area about 60 miles around, how does the word go from a place like modern Israel, which is, out in the middle of the Middle East, to most of the world? I mean, there's a recognition almost everywhere in the world of Christianity. Even if they don't believe it, they have heard of it, correct? So how did this happen? Well, there's no newspapers, there's no electronic media back then. There is none of the resources that you and I have. Today we're amazed. Something happens in the world, somewhere far away, tens of thousands of miles away, and within 5 minutes, most of the world what? Knows about it. Isn't that incredible? This period, that didn't happen. So how does things get about? How does the message have to travel? It's got to travel through communications, talk, people explaining things, word of mouth. Well, that's slow. The other thing is literacy is very low. Only about 3% of the people could read and write very well. And those people that read and wrote very well, they had good jobs. Oftentimes they were employed by kings or the government. Their jobs were called scribes. They did the bookkeeping. They did the writing. They did all of the things that were essential to keeping up. But most people don't have resources, don't know how to read. There is no paper like we know it. Product that's probably like papyrus or animal skins or some of the things along that way that people wrote on, parchment. And most people were uneducated, unlettered. In fact, most of the apostles of Jesus, the 12 that he had, would be considered to be, at that time, agrammatos. That means without schooling, no letters. They knew how to maybe write their name, count change, and that's a basic level, a very low level of literacy. Even if you meet people that are functionally illiterate today, they probably know how to write their name. They probably know how to count their change, count money, get by a little bit, but don't throw anything written in front of them because they're going to be lost, correct? So where does this information have to come from? Pictures. The old see it and I'll believe it. How important is that in life? You've probably said that to people. Show me. Prove it to me. Give me some information. The Byzantine church, or the church of the East, was very successful in doing this. Churches are laid out like storybooks. Everything is intentional. And we're going to learn a little bit about that tonight. And it's just not the representation of a religious figure or a saint that is important. But what is the symbols and what is about that story that is inspiring to the person? Because the Orthodox will tell you they don't believe in these things as talismans. These are not rabbit's feet. You don't rub them. You don't put them in your pocket. They're there for inspiration, but they're not there to be venerated in the true sense. So, now those Roman emperors, oh, I hope you've eaten. Maybe you shouldn't have eaten. Tiberius came right after Augustus. Augustus, of course, you know, was the adopted stepson, the nephew of Julius Caesar. Tiberius was so corrupt, he moved out of Rome. He had the Isle of Capri, where he had lavish orgies all day. Men, women, all kinds of things. Put people to death for spectacles. In fact, he was so cruel, he put to death the parents of Caligula. Caligula's father was a prominent Roman general. He presented such a threat to Tiberius that he put him to death. Poisoned him. And then poisoned and forced his mother and brothers and sisters to all commit suicide. And because Caligula was the youngest, he spared him. When Caligula was 18, he was invited to Capri. No hard feelings. Yeah. Well, Caligula planned his demise. He and a guy named Draco, who was the captain of the Praetorian Guard, cemented a pact. Caligula slept with Draco's wife. They cemented their pact, and they ended up killing the heir to the Roman throne, which was Tiberius' son. Caligula at first started real well, but it looks like he got a brain fever of some sort, went completely insane. Slept with his sister, killed his first wife, kept her around even though she was rotting. Spent money like he was crazy. Composed plays and forced people to sit in the hot Roman sun while he acted them out. When people passed out, too bad. He decided he was going to go on a campaign, take the legions out. It was often that these Caesars would try to prove that they're militarily capable. Caligula had no military experience, so he was going to go attack Britannia. He marched through France, he got to the English Channel, and then proceeded to tell his troops to whip the waves of the North Sea. He was crackers. Eventually, the Praetorian Guard decided to off him and his entire family. The only one that was spared was his uncle, Claudius, who hid himself in the drapes. And after the slaughter had come down, he was the only one left. They decided, well, here's our next Caesar. Claudius was a little better. Also had some of the same tendencies with spending too much, etc., etc. He was eventually poisoned by the stepmother of Nero, who was trying to get her stepson in power. Nero came to power, and he was just terrible. Spent the entire fortune of Rome within a couple years, drove him into debt, put on elaborate plays and musicals. He was so deranged. You know, there seems to be a nexus with a lot of these guys, plays and musicals. I imagine that must have been fun. And of course, he got a little tired of his living accommodations, and he decided to burn part of Rome. Now, he didn't do it personally, but it was ordered to be done. The old story is, was Rome burning and Nero fiddling somewhere? Well, there was no fiddles back then. It wasn't so. Don't think Jack Daniels was coming out of the woodwork and he was fiddling away. No, it was probably a lyre he was playing, and maybe he wasn't even present, but what we know is fire in the ancient world, they didn't have the good hands people. You know, there was no insurance. So if your house burned down, you're out of luck. You're homeless with no recourse to build or take care of yourself. Well, a third of the city is burned down, and Nero shows no remorse to anybody. Instead, what does he do? He takes and has all the area that's burned down razed, and he takes it and makes a huge palace called the Domus Aurea. This palace, they have pictures of what they thought it would look like. It would make Versailles look like a country club cottage. Eventually, Nero would be so despised and hated that he ran for his life. He was pursued by Roman legionnaires and ended up committing suicide. So against that backdrop, what are people looking for? You know, when your politics stink, you don't look to politicians for your inspiration, do you? What do you look for? Tranquility, peace. Where are you finding that? Faith. People are turning to a new religion, which is making claims of an afterlife, peaceful, etc. So up until Nero, Christians are viewed as a little bit like a cult. Nice people, but don't bother me unless I'm part of you. But people are making the effort. They're reaching out. They're trying to proselytize, get people interested. Romans don't care until Nero decides to blame Christians for the fire and starts to persecute them actively. Those persecutions last all the way up until the Emperor Trajan, who had like a don't ask, don't tell policy. If you didn't go around telling everybody in the world that you were Christian, he didn't care. If you wanted to have church, he didn't bother you. He didn't break into your home to rouse you out of bed. And based on that, we see that the first 100 years, from about 115 onwards, Christianity actually started to accelerate because there wasn't active oppression by the Caesars. The oppression would begin again in the middle of the 200s and would really amp up under a Roman emperor by the name of Diocletian. Diocletian was one of the last emperors of the West. He was fighting the Persians in the east, he was fighting the Germans to the north, and everything was kind of going badly. And one of the things that he was very frustrated with was Christians who served in the legions wouldn't serve and pledge loyalty to Caesar, as in to Diocletian. And that was one of his problems with them. It will be the efforts of people like St. Paul who really pushed Christianity. Paul was not one of the original 12 apostles. He came right afterwards. He never ran with Jesus. He didn't see Jesus. Of course, we know part of his story was he had, at least the story goes, a conversion, blinded on the road home from Damascus. Heard the voices and came and talked to the remaining apostles about his desire to preach and proselytize. They don't believe him. And he says, you know what, guys, you can talk all you want with the Jews, but you're never going to make this grow. You got to talk to the Gentiles. Well, the Gentiles is what? The world outside, yeah. The Greek-speaking and Romans, the Latin-speaking peoples. And we know that he was very prolific about it. He probably would have had the world's Travelers Award back then. Look at how far he went. 4 journeys. And, you know, we're not talking jets. We're talking walking, ships, staying amongst congregants in all these places. And we know from his various letters to various congregations, he was attempting to give them direction. Because one of the things we know about Christianity, like most major religions, the spiritual impetus, they didn't leave you with a guide like franchises, like McDonald's. They didn't say, this is what makes a church. Or you do this many times, or you do this. There was no business plan. You had to develop those things. And that meant local people gathering together, and oftentimes, people get together, they get squabbles going. Oh, I think we'll do it this way. No, we'll do it that way. Oh, no, we should, And of course, who would they go back to? Paul. Give us instruction. Tell us your thoughts. And he did. Of course, Paul ultimately ended up dying in Rome. Along with Peter, of course, which was Jesus' right-hand man. And they would be considered to be part of this early group of people, martyrs, inspiring Christians who've given it all for their faith. Now, the two up here are two of some of the original Christian martyrs, Sebastian and St. Andrew. St. Andrew, of course, being one of the first apostles, Sebastian coming from the latter part of the 100s, early 200s. And the sorts of things that they went through was incredible. They were tortured for their beliefs by the authorities, often put to death. And if they did escape death, they often would go back for seconds. Sebastian, it looks like he was riddled here with arrows. Part of the story was Irene, who's, I believe, on the wall here somewhere, or going to be on the wall. Back wall, I'm sorry. Rescued him. And you think that after you've been riddled with arrows, you would stop? He went out and told the Roman leadership they were wrong anyway, and they got rid of him a second time. So the saints are role models, and they serve as living examples, teaching tools, kind of like posters for primary school kids. You ever go to a primary school classroom? They may have a word or two, and then they have a picture there to reinforce the word. Icons are the same way, because they're not only the representation of the person, but many times there are things in the icon that gives us tips as to what they did and how they did it, and what the trial or tribulation they overcame. And for people with a limited reading ability, this is great. So it not only serves as a catechism or a historical record, but it also provides things. Now, when does things start to turn around for Christianity? Well, it starts with this guy behind me, Constantine. Constantine is the first Roman emperor to politically embrace Christianity. Now, some people say, oh, he was Christian. Yeah, he was, but it wasn't until his deathbed he accepted Christ. Now, we know his mother was Christian, Helen, and he sent her on travels to the Holy Lands, looking for the relics of Jesus, and most importantly, the most important relic that she supposedly found was the cross. And there's a whole story that goes along with that. But just to give you an idea how organic Christianity is spreading, this is person to person moving out. By 325, this is the impact of Christianity. The area that roughly we know that our Christians are in. And Rome is diminishing. Remember, Rome at this time is 1 million people. It is a diverse cosmopolitan city that has all sorts of things going on with it. But now, Constantine says Rome is no longer good enough. It's insecure. He realizes that these Germanic tribes up here are building. He can't keep security, and he decides that he's going to move his capital to a new city he founds called Constantinople, which is right over here. And it's going to exploit the Silk Roads, trade. It's wealthy, it's at the right place, the right time. So now we're going to see from about 400 going to about 700, Rome is kind of on its own. It's floundering a little bit. There is no protections of the empire as active as it would be. So what we're going to see is the development in the early Christian church. And remember, we're not talking denominations now. So strike out this nonsense, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever. We're talking Christian church. There's one. Now, there are people in there that have different beliefs, which will have to be reconciled. And that was done through what we call ecumenical councils. But going forward, there is going to be, and this starts about 500 AD, something called the Petarchy, which is the 5 principal seeds of Christianity, which are going to either have a patriarch or a pope. Pope is, of course, a fancy word for father figure in the Greek. Spiritual father, who are going to oversee churches in a region. Constantinople was probably the largest at the beginning and had the biggest authority because it was the church of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was the replacement for Rome. Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, Alexandria. Those are the 5 principal cities. 5 principal cities of Christianity. 3 of which are going to be eventually subsumed to Islam. But early church, most of the Christian cities are in the east, setting the path. So because of distance and authority, it wasn't always easy to maintain control. And what we find is different faith practices emerge, different sorts of theologies, etc. And those have to be reconciled in 7 ecumenical councils that are called by the emperor of what we call now the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire. Bringing the main church leaders together to talk about doctrine. What is it to be a Christian? What are our core beliefs? How do we practice, etc.? The word orthodoxy comes from the word right way, the Greek word right way. In other words, doing it all the same. Not having variation. Although it's going to be very difficult. There were 7 conferences that were held from 300 to 700 to deal with that. Now, I'm going to turn my program, I've done enough talking. You don't want to hear from me. I'm not the good spiritual guy who has the insights. We have an authority here. Father John will walk us through the rest of this.
Not an authority at all. Thank you, Mr. George. Okay. So thank you, Mr. George, on the presentation, and kind of to give me an intro into what I'm going to say here. As we see, George took us through a wide span of history. I'm kind of going to do the same thing as well, but to focus on a message, the message of Christ before Christ. We'll start with that. And you might ask, how is this possible? What are you talking about? You're talking about Christ before he came? Well, if you look at it, iconography in a way depicts that. If you look here on the left, now we have a picture. And I'll ask a question. What do you think that icon on the left is showing there? I know it looks pretty bad, but you probably have heard of the story. And there you go. You have that. And what do you think that prefigures? He's going to sacrifice his son, right? Put it together, right? What is it? We all know, Jesus Christ, right? He kind of points to that. In the middle here, you have all these men with the long beards. What is this? What is going on here? It was basically Old Testament prophets that talked about Jesus Christ before he came. And on the right, see, I got the pointer here, right? Let's see how this works. There we go. We have the Virgin Mary. What are all these people doing in the tree? Is it her family tree? No. These people here are prophets from the Old Testament that spoke about the Virgin Mary before she came. And I'm going to touch upon a few of the prophets. And the reason I'm going to do that because it ties in with our iconography presentation. It ties in with what we have here. For example, the prophet of Jonah. Now, I'm not going in any particular order. There's many prophets from the Old Testament. I'm just going to touch upon a few because they're actually, it's pretty cool to see what they talked about before Christ. So, for example, here, prophet Jonah, who lived 800 years before Christ. And I won't go into the whole slide, but the main thing is here, he prefigured Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And we have here in the Gospel of Matthew, that kind of ties it back. As Jonah was in the whale's belly 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. This is Jesus Christ saying this, going back to the Old Testament. Again, we have Prophet Jonah here in the dome above us. Moving on. Again, no order here. I'm just like kind of jumping from prophet to prophet. It's kind of bringing out the ones that speak the most about Jesus Christ. And actually, Isaiah is interesting because the early church, the fathers, as we say, the early church, the first people that kind of gave exegesis about the scriptures and kind of broke things down for the people, said that the prophet Isaiah, right here, spoke so much about Christ that it's almost that he was around when Christ was around. It's almost that he knew him. Obviously, they had a 700-year difference about, give or take, from the time of Isaiah's prophecies to Jesus Christ. So we see some of the big ones here. Will be born of a virgin from the line of David. Gentiles will seek him. Will bear the sins of many for the sake of the salvation. Will be spat and struck upon, and will die a transgressor's death. And there's a lot more. This is not it. This is not limited to just this. But again, I'm bringing out a few of the prophecies that he said about Jesus Christ. And again, by looking at this, if you know a little about the scriptures, you kind of put the pieces together, right? We move on here. Jeremiah, again, another one. He prophesies around 600 years before Christ. It foretold about the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ, the new covenant. Again, the new covenant that Jesus Christ gave with the body and his body and blood. Daniel, again, is another one. Daniel, and he prophesied during the captivity in Babylon. We all heard a story about the 3 youths, and actually I put the picture here, the 3 youths. Again, this is not in the church, but this is from the catacombs, early 3rd century in Rome, where, again, it gave us a picture. Again, you have to remember, as Mr. George said, that people couldn't read at this time. The scriptures were not really available, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in some details as we move on. But again, the pictures kind of depicted things that we're trying to convey, the message of God. So again, Zechariah is another good one. He talked about the entry into Jerusalem that Jesus Christ had, his crucifixion, the scattering of the apostles. I have a few more in here, that are not here, but the betrayal of Jesus Christ again for the silver. So again, he was 500 years before Christ. Again, Zacharias is up here. He is right, kind of put a picture with a picture right there. Again, and we have about 16 prophets in there. There's more prophets in the Old Testament. We're not going to go into every single one of them. But I'm trying to portray here that they've got a message, right? They have a message that they're trying to talk to get out to the people. And what we know from the Old Testament that we've read, that not many people listen to the message, right? They try to warn the people didn't like it. Many times they persecuted the prophets and killed them. So the message is not really getting out, right? It's not really getting out. We saw in one of the slides that the Gentiles will be worshiping God. Well, how are they going to worship him if you're not really getting the message to them? If we read from the Old Testament, the Gentiles and the Jews, they really, they were supposed to be kept separate for many reasons. Again, Mr. George talked about a few of them as well. But as I mentioned, the message is not getting out. So what is the next way that we can try to get the message out? Again, Mr. George talked a little about Alexander the Great. I'm not going to go into details on this. But this is a very important development in the history, and actually the history of the church. Again, we're talking about before the time of Christ, right? So what did Alexander the Great do? As we know, you've probably seen the movie. There's a few movies that are about him. But anyway, so Alexander the Great, about 300 years before Christ, again, summarizing here on the dates, he expanded the Hellenized world, and with that, he brought in the Greek culture, the religion. He didn't really force it on some people. In other places he did, other places he didn't. But the common thing, the main thing that he did that I want to point out is that he brought more Greek, expanded the Greek language. And this is very important because what you see here, and also how Mr. George said about the Roman Empire, Greek, ancient Greek becomes, in a way, the English that we have today, right? For those who travel outside of America, you know, it's nice always to learn the language that you're going to. If you're going to Spain, trying to this, or if you're going to Germany, speak a little German, you try your best. But what is the easiest for us? We're blessed, you know, we speak a language that, in a way, the whole world speaks, right? Or at least they're trying to learn English. Anywhere you go, you're going to find somebody that speaks English. It's that language, international language of doing business, right? You can call it many different things. So, with Alexander's conquest and his death, and the breakup actually of his empire, he was broken up again, as Mr. George had mentioned, between his generals and so on, you had the Greek language spread. That created a base here to get the message out even more. And what is interesting around this time is that some years later, that you had the translation of the 5 books of the Torah into Greek with the Septuagint that was done. Again, this was not done by Alexander, but again by one of his generals, I believe, grandsons, who wanted to add it to the collection in Alexandria, the famous library that was there. And also it was needed for many of the Jews that didn't know their own language. They knew Greek. It's like, how are you going to get the message about? So it was a good way, it was a good opportunity to have this done. So we go now to the ministry of Christ. Again, I'm fast forwarding a little. I mean, we're skipping a few things, but I'm trying to hit on some of the major points. And also here, again, Mr. George spoke about it earlier, and I won't go into it again, but we have Jesus Christ, his ministry on earth. As we say, the second person of the Trinity. In the end of the Gospel of Matthew, he tells his followers to go baptize people in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them pretty much all that I've taught you, and to keep on going. And Christ was a figure where, you know, his crucifixion was witnessed by many. His resurrection was witnessed by a few, but also it was witnessed by many later on. Too many people saw him for the 40 days that he ministered after his death to the multitudes, and he was able to get believers by doing this. But this too has a limit. So how do you get the word out even past this? Anyone know what this is here? I mean, anyone want to take a guess? Read a little? I don't know. Mr. George said I'd give you an A++ for the people that are in this class. I should be careful what I said. I might watch someone read the whole thing here. Any idea what this is? I mean, obviously it's Greek, right? Ancient Greek. All right, so this here is the Gospel of John. I can read a little. See, the issue, I mean, there's many issues with this because if you see, every word's like right next to each other, right? I mean, it's just continuous. I used to write like this when I was like learning how to write, right? Like a litho kid. And archino logos, ke logos prosto theo, and that's really, as far as I can go. If you give me the text in Greek, I could read more because it's broken up. There's, punctuation, you know where to stop, where the sentence starts, where it ends. But we have this now. And this manuscript is one of the oldest manuscripts, I believe, in the whole New Testament. It's from the Orthodox monastery in Sinai in Egypt. The whole tradition holds that Moses received the commandments there, and eventually a monastery was built during the Christian era that is still functioning and still there to this day. Again, there are older manuscripts that have existed, pieces and bits, fragments or whatnot, but this one here is one of the most complete ones, as I mentioned. So you have this. Okay, it's great. We have it in Greek. But the issue is, there's a few issues with this too. There's limitations. Greek is good, right? We said that it's good. It was able to get the language out, to get the message out, the message of the prophets, the message of Christ. As I mentioned earlier, it's like the English today, right? You got to put it into context, the ancient Greek of the time. But we run into a few issues with this, right? Can you read it? Can you read this? No, we can't, right? No, we can't. But even back then, as Mr. George mentioned, you only had a few people or a handful of people that were educated enough to read this. And let's say you were educated enough, you were blessed to be, to have a decent education. Could you afford a manuscript? Could you afford something like this? As we mentioned, it was made of papyrus, different forms of animal linings or whatnot. This stuff was not cheap to have the scriptures once they were put down in pen. Sheepskin, different materials. Not everyone can have this. That's why once the scriptures were circulated, monasteries would have them, people with power, but the everyday person didn't. So we go to this now. An old phrase that we've heard many times, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? I mean, in this scene here, we can kind of put it together. We know what's going on. But I can add to you that there's a prophecy in the Old Testament being fulfilled in this too. Anyone want to take a guess? If you see it anywhere. You got the star. There's probably a few, but the one I'm going to point out is, I got the wrong button there. Oh. You have the ox, the donkey. That's from the prophecy of Isaiah, where it says, these animals will know the crib of their master, basically referring to Jesus Christ. And Isaiah was the one of the prophets that I showed you earlier. He's up in the dome. But here you have all the scriptures that talk about the nativity of Christ. You have the wise men right here, the angels, the shepherds, Joseph. And here, he's being tempted. He's thinking, should I divorce her because she's pregnant? I don't know what's going on. So you have all this in one picture. And there's more too. I'm not going to overdo it either, but to show that this is a good way in getting the word out. Now, if we backtrack, that icon that I showed you is a little more modern. It could trace itself back to maybe the 5th century, 4th century, in different forms. But we're going back to the primitive stuff here, the early Christian symbols in the catacombs, teaching, really teaching tools. It was a way of preservation. It was a way of secrecy as well. As Mr. George mentioned, during this time of the Roman Empire, before the legalization of Christianity, you had a lot of persecution. Christianity at points was driven literally underground. And this we can contest to, we can have today, we see with the catacombs that are, most of the well-known ones are in Italy, modern-day Italy, Rome. You do have some in Greece, Asia Minor, but the best-known ones, the best preserved ones I would probably say are in Italy. So here you have these three symbols. As you see, there's an anchor right here, there's a fish in the middle, and it's, again, hard to see, it's carved off in a rock, but an X and a P. Really, the P is the Greek R, which is for Christ, his initials. I'm sorry, not his initials, but the first two letters of Christ. So we see this development of the use of images. You really had it in the Old Testament too, but now we're going to focus more of it here after Christ and the way that it was used to spread his message. And some more icons, you could say, are frescoes from the catacomb. And here you have, it's kind of hard to see, but this is really the wedding in Cana. Okay. Obviously here, Jesus Christ. Here, this depicts the Eucharist. Or also the blessing of the loaves, the 5 loaves. You can kind of count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the fish underneath. Again, it's seen the wear of time as well. They faded a little. But these, again, were used as teaching tools for the early Christians. Again, you got to imagine, these people are poor. They really don't know how to read. Even if they knew how to read, the stuff's not available, the scriptures. It's still going around orally. they're recording it in images. And again, imagine the catacombs were a place where Christians would meet. It's a place where they would meet together to bury their dead. It was a place they would meet to worship. And at the end of the day, it was a place to learn too. So, an icon has many functions. You see, it's a teaching tool. It's used as liturgical items. Aids used for worship. And I like this. This is from the Antiochian Orthodox Church. It's a jurisdiction within the Orthodox Church. And they give a good, I think, a summary of what an icon is in the eyes of the Orthodox Church. And sorry, some of it's cut off here, but the Orthodox Church, an icon is a sacred image, a window to heaven, an image of another reality, a person, time, and place that is more real than now. More than art, icons have important spiritual roles. The primary purpose of an icon is to aid in worship. So, what does this mean now? Icons of veneration. I'm going to kind of jump here to the next phase of my talk. How do we use an icon of veneration? We've heard that we have idols, we have this. There's a confusion about this. So I'll give you a little story not many may know about. It's a tradition in the Orthodox Church, probably the Catholic Church as well. And there was this king, a pagan king right here, King Avgar. Depending how do you say it in Greek and English, we'll just say the king. Let's not butcher his name, of Edessa. So the tradition is that this king was suffering from leprosy, and he heard about the message of Jesus Christ. He lived during the time of Christ. In the Gospel of Matthew, in the beginning, it says that the word of God, Christ, spread into Syria. This is where this tradition comes from. That this person heard about it. And it's like, I hear there's this Christ, he's healing these sick people, he's healing these blind people, these people who have leprosy like myself. I need to visit him. I can't make it there. Hopefully he can come to me. I know he travels a little, kind of like Mr. George said. Back that time, you did the traveling within the place. It was kind of hard to travel. There was no jets, there was no this, there was no that. It was dangerous, it was expensive, it was hot. So he sent a person to see if he can get Christ to come to him. He heard he was preaching in these areas, and he sent one of his servants out to go get him. And this guy was actually a painter. He would paint portraits of the king. Again, these guys are pagan. And the tradition holds that he saw Christ preaching one day. And he tried to draw him. He tried to get him down on a piece of papyrus and get a good image, a sketch on him, but he couldn't. He kept on messing up for some reason. People were walking in front of him. Christ was moving around. He just couldn't get it down. So he eventually went to Christ and says, listen, my king has requested you come and visit him to cleanse up of his leprosy. And Christ being hot, again, he's preaching, he's tired, he's hot. In a way dirty, right? You're getting tired, you're hot, you're sweating. He took a handkerchief and just wiped his face, and it says that the holy image was implanted in this napkin. And this guy's really, well, I don't have an image, but I can take this back to the king. And he took it back to him, and he was cleansed of his leprosy. And the tradition holds that he was cleansed halfway, and that when Christ's disciples came to that area and preached, he told them, I'm a believer, and he was cleansed fully of his leprosy. So that's what the Orthodox Church holds. But what I'm trying to say with this is that we had this icon, the start of the icon. This is actually one of the oldest icons going back to tradition. Also, St. Luke, the evangelist, is known as a patron saint for iconographers. Again, this is within the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church as well, that he's one that's depicted an icon as well of Christ and the Virgin Mary. So we have this cloth, and supposedly the miracles that come from it. And we see in the Acts of the Apostles as well that we have things like this that happen, right? We have, for example, in the beginning of Acts of the Apostles where Peter is walking, they're putting people in the shadows of Peter so he can be healed. Or later on when we have Paul, as Mr. George mentioned, Paul comes into play. I think it's Acts chapter 19, I believe, where it talks about people would put handkerchiefs on Paul and take back to heal people who are sick. So, these are things that are in the scriptures, these items that we're referring back to. So we have these images that played an important role for veneration as well. Unfortunately, we kind of come into an issue here with the spread of Islam. as Mr. George had mentioned earlier on his slide, you had the 5 major centers: Rome, Constantinople, you go into Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. Pretty much in that order. I mean, actually, Jerusalem fell last. You would think that would be first because, that's where Jesus Christ ministered, but it really went off the structure of the Roman Empire. An important city, Rome, eventually also an important city, Constantinople. These kind of took the 2 major seats in terms of the early church. But with the rise of Islam, we run into an issue where it had spread fast. Muhammad died around 630, actually 632. And you see the spread that happened. 20 years later, you have it continue here into Europe. And Jerusalem falls. The Patriarch Sophronius of Jerusalem, again, you got to put yourself in the context here. You have these people that are attacking. Jerusalem was under siege for a couple years. Again, one way, if you couldn't break into the walls, you would siege them. You would cut them off. You would starve them out. And the defenders were tired. They were getting hungry. They were going to the Patriarch. Again, the Patriarch has a direct lineage back to the apostles. But he's I guess you could say, the Pope of Jerusalem, right, in those areas there. He's a major the church figure. The people are like, listen, we can't hold out anymore. We just got to give in, let them in. We don't know who these people are. They're destroying churches, they're doing this, they're attacking. So they eventually give in. But they say at least, all right, we're going to give up, but please spare our churches, spare us. We'll do whatever you want, but just don't destroy anything. And for the most part, again, there have been issues with the rise of Islam, Christianity. As we know, there are a lot of bad things that have happened, right? But there's also a few good things. And in this story that I'm trying to say is once the Patriarch submitted down, he opened up the walls of Jerusalem, the gates, and let in the Caliph Umar. So as he was touring his new conquered city, the Patriarch Sophronius tells him, here, we're at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Do you want to come in and pray? You got to think at that time, too, it didn't really soak in, right? You're talking about 20 years later, after the death of Muhammad, is it a new religion? Jesus Christ was mentioned in Islam. We really don't know. We don't know what's going on. But he asked him, listen, do you want to come in and pray at the church? And the Caliph said, actually, you know what? No, I'll pray here at the steps. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because if I pray inside, later generations are going to probably take the church away because I prayed here. So I'm going to do it here. Thanks for the offer. And I'll pray here. And this kind of builds into the next section here. Again, things travel a little slow, right? As we mentioned earlier, as Mr. George mentioned earlier, it's not like it is now. If something happens on the other side of the world, we pretty much know about it. If it's a major event, within minutes, seconds. We run into an issue here, this iconoclastic controversy. And basically what this is, about 100 years after the rise of Islam, and there's many, again, I'm kind of putting things together here, summarizing, because I don't want, you don't want to be here all night listening to me. You got better things to do. But I'm summarizing here, and there's many other things that are going into effect here. But one issue is the emperor in Constantinople sees that we've already lost Antioch, we've already lost Jerusalem, we've already lost Alexandria. The 5 patriarchates have been go down to Rome and Constantinople. Who's going to be next? What's going on? What is happening here? What is this new religion? I mean, these people, we don't really know who these people are. We know a little, and what we know is that they don't like images. Is maybe God on their side because we have all these images around us? I mean, churches back then would be something like this, even covered more so. Are we doing something wrong here? So the church, again, at this point where we said the church is still one church. There's no Catholic, there's no Orthodox, there's no Protestant. It's still the one church. What is going on here? What do we do? So we come into the iconoclast controversy, which lasts about 100 years. It actually puts a major strain on the Christian faith. These things that we were taught from the very beginning about the images that were used, these teaching tools, are they bad? Are we really doing bad things to ourselves by having them in our churches as liturgical aids, as teaching aids, as aids for veneration, towards worship? And what's going on? So after a few councils getting together, persecutions as well as Christians, you had the Christians that were for icons. You had the other ones that were against it. Like I said, the church was literally split. Like they didn't know what way to go. So it came out eventually about 100 years after, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, they got together and said that icons, and this is what the church always believed, going back again, we said the one church, no Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, it's the one church before we had all the denominations, said that icons are tools for worship, aids in worship. They're to be venerated, but not worshipped. And they made reference back to the Old Testament. Yes, you did have the idols. You're not supposed to worship idols, but it's two different things, because if you read some more in the Old Testament, that the tabernacle had images on it. The temple, or the temples, because they were built and destroyed, had images in there too. But they were more used for liturgical aids in worship. So it brings us into today. Icons today. As we see here, I'll start here on the left, we have an icon of St. John the Baptist. And this one here, this icon is unique because this icon is in Chicago. It's in an Orthodox church in Chicago. And you kind of see some line streaking here, right? They say that this is a miracle-working icon. Myrrh is coming from it. And again, this is a thing that happens. God, as we believe as Christians, that He can bend the limitations of nature, right? As we say, it says in the scriptures that the virgin, as the prophet Isaiah said too, and other prophets, that the virgin will conceive and bear a son. Obviously, the limitations are bent there. With here, an icon, a piece of wood, the limitations are bent, again, with the grace of God. Moving on here, you have another icon here of St. George. And you see all this stuff around here. I'll give you a story real quick. One time when I was in seminary, we went on our senior trip to Greece, to Mount Athos. And I know not many people have heard of that, but if you're Orthodox, you know that Mount Athos is a monastic community that's been around for a little over 1,000 years. And you have all the different jurisdictions of the Orthodox Church that are present there. You have Russians, Romanians, Serbians, Bulgarians. The unique thing about Mount Athos is they have a divine liturgy every day. Every monastery is required to have a divine liturgy every day, to have a mass, I guess, going from the Catholic perspective every day. And with time, they've accumulated gifts from emperors, from saints, from this and that. Many people have passed from these places. So we went and visited and stayed at a monastery for a weekend. And the monk was giving us a tour of the church. Here we got the manuscripts, some old manuscripts, some this, some that. And he showed us an icon. Again, this is not the icon, but to give you an idea. We saw an icon that looked something like this. And there were so many things on it, you really couldn't see the icon. You had, if you look at this closely, you're going to see chains, pearls, medallions here, whatnot. But anyway, he told us to look at it. It was an icon of the Virgin Mary, kind of like, the people on the left here, if you can see this, it was an icon like this one here, if you're seeing, I'm pointing down there. But again, covered again with gold, silver, and all that. So he said, look in here, you see there are two medals, gold Olympic medals. Wow, two gold Olympic medals. What are they doing there? Wouldn't you have that, you're going to wear it around your neck. I don't know with an Olympiad when they get it, what do they do with it? Did they hang it up on their wall? Did they store it away? I don't know. But they were on this icon. Why were they on this icon? Well, the story is that this Olympiad must have had an issue. I don't know what it was. They told me, I probably don't remember, but I remember seeing them there. And they said that he had an issue, and then he prayed at this icon, asked for whatever he was asking for, and out of his gratefulness, out of his thankfulness, that he gave something that was so dear to him, for giving thanks for having a prayer answered, he gave his 2 Olympic gold medals. That might sound stupid, right? It's like, why would you do something like that? But for the person that had whatever transformation it was, or whatever prayer answered, something happened. There was a miracle that happened for this person. Again, for us, that didn't happen to us, or we don't know, we don't understand. It kind of seems a little odd. So you have icons that, as I mentioned, going back from the very beginning, they're used for liturgical aids, teaching tools as well, but also veneration. Just last Sunday, going back to what I said earlier about that iconoclastic period with the Seven Ecumenical Council, we celebrated the Sunday of Orthodoxy. All the Orthodox Church celebrates this, where we celebrate the restoration of icons. And the common thing with this is that you have a procession with icons. Originally, the procession would happen in the streets, in the old city streets. People would go around the city. Again, remember, a city that's kind of closed off with a wall. They would go around, sing hymns, prayers, and they would make their procession around. Again, now we do them in the churches. We might do them outside. We have a kind of a sister parish. Actually, it's an orphanage here in Africa that we're working with, and they're celebrating. See, we're doing the same thing, right? In essence, again, with an icon, we have the same faith. We have the same belief. We show the same thing. So again, some of the uses of icons today. And to go with that now, to conclude, we were blessed here in our community to have icons installed recently as well. So this icon here is right above you. I don't know if you saw it when you came in. I know some people on the sides may not be able to see it, but I put it on the slide here. And we see the transformation that happens in front of us, right? Originally, icons would be painted. Really, they're, say, written. You know, when you write an icon, you're not painting. It's called, you're writing it. It's really, you're writing the theology of what the church believes. You're putting it down. Not into words, but into pictures. But in essence, it's the same thing. So we had the icon installed. And this icon here of Jesus Christ is what we call the Pantokratora. In Greek means the all-ruling one. You see with the dome, we started here. We put it on as a piece of canvas. And we go from there. And some more of the installation, as you see, the transformation that happens with the application of the prophets around. So again, the icon of Christ upon the Pantokratora. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, but basically the one thing to take away from this is that you have Jesus Christ. And it shows that he's the judge, right? But he's the compassionate judge. He's going to judge us by the gospel. And at the same time, he's going to judge us, but he's also blessing us as well. And actually, this icon of the Pantokratora, this form of it, the oldest known icon goes back to that monastery that I mentioned in Sinai with the scriptures, with the manuscript that I showed you. Ironically, again, we talked about the issues with Islam, but there's also good things that we should talk about too, that during this iconoclastic period in the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, a lot of the icons were destroyed. As you saw that manuscript now going back where it showed the person kind of blotting out the image of Christ, that happened within the jurisdiction of the Roman Empire. Stuff that was outside of the Roman Empire was actually pretty safe. The things that were under Islam was okay. For example, the icon that we mentioned here at the St. Catherine's Monastery, that fell out of the realm of the Roman Empire. And that's one reason why they have some of the oldest surviving icons that predate the iconoclastic period that we have here, the 726 to 815, which is very important. Again, outside of the Roman Empire, under really Muslim occupation. And the one icon, again, it's in the altar. It's covered by the screen, so I figured I'd put it on the slide here because you can't see it. So it's an icon of Pania Platitera, which basically means the Virgin Mary that's wider than the heavens. And also incorporates the prophecy of Isaiah, as you hear here. So that's what I have. As you see with iconography, you have a message. From what I try to explain with my presentation, that you have messages that are trying to get out. And the best way to get it out is with images. At least this is what sustained the early church by having the icons. That's why with the Orthodox Church we still have them. From the limitations of the languages, of the Greek, of the manuscripts, and everything else that was mentioned, this is the best way to go in getting the word out, the message out of God. And also, in a way, to show that we're called to be saints too, because we have the saints, we can depict them because they are us, right? They're not created any differently than us. They're sinners like ourselves. And that's another way, going back to what I said earlier about aids in worship. It kind of helps us to focus, saying, if they can do it, then we can do it too. So thank you again.
I, unlike these two, do not publicly speak ever, so I have note cards in case I forget anything, so just so you know. But how we're going to start is just some popular icons that you can find in many of the churches. So starting off is how you would read icons and what iconography is. So how you read icons is by starting in the center, so go back to here and use some examples. You start in the center, and right here you can obviously tell that those are Jesus Christ, and you go on and expand outward. So from here then you'd go to the book, figure out what that says. Over here you'd go to who these would be, everything like that, and then take the story from that. And then what iconography is it's the study of symbolism and the interpretation in art and all the symbolic meanings that it can have. So we're going to start with St. John the Baptist. And if you folks want to have a better look at it, it is right over there underneath 1, 2, 3 to the right. And what we're going to talk about is who John the Baptist was, importance in the Bible, and what symbols are used in this icon to show. And so some of them that would say what his story is going to be the head on the plate, the wings, the color tones, how he has a cross, the axe in the tree, and what his scroll says. So who John the Baptist was a huge figure in biblical times and was used as a messenger. And that is why he is given wings. Even though he isn't an angel, he was a messenger of God and spread the word of the Lord. So for the color tones, you can see he is tan skin with a green robe. And what that means is he was a green martyr. And so what a green martyr is someone who gives up the comforts of everyday life and lives among the wilderness. Now, his head is the big story, and that is one way that you can tell who this is, even though he does have the wings. And for those who don't know, he was beheaded because he called out King Herod on something that was not right in God's eyes. And then finally, what it is the scroll, and I have it written down here. And what it says is, "Seest thou what suffer those who censor, O word of God? The faults of the unclean do not belong to be able to bear censor. Lo, Herod, cut off my head, O Savior." And so what he's basically saying is, he called out Herod for marrying his brother's wife, saying that that was wrong. And because of that, he was beheaded, but he did it in his name. And then obviously the cross up here symbolizes the Christian faith. And then an axe over here is from a scripture that says, "Cut down all trees that do not bear good fruit and throw it in the fire." The nativity scene also is in here. It's going to be right up in that area, right on top of Mary and Jesus. And so the importance of the scenery, any of the prophecies that were made, and Father obviously said one of Isaiah 1:3 where it says the donkey and the ox see its master, and other symbols that are used. And so symbols that are used is how you can read it. So you'll start with Jesus in the manger. And one way that is depicted a lot of times, Jesus is depicted in a barn setting, where in reality, animals back in that day were kept in caves just because it was easier. So they used that, and they used the rockiness of the cave around to show the cruel world that Jesus was thrust into and what he'd have to save humanity from. The angel and the herder are another good one. It shows how the herder is going towards the angel but isn't yet with Christ, so he's not yet a follower. And then Joseph right down here is seeing that you can tell what he's going through. And some people say that the old man here is actually supposed to be Satan in disguise, telling him lies that this cannot be the Son of God. A virgin cannot give birth. And so through this, you can read the story of the birth of Jesus and all that is important. And then this one is called the harrowing of hell. It is also more commonly known as the resurrection of Christ. And that one is up here too, right over here. And that's just if you folks want to get a better look at it when the presentation is over and what the significance of this is. I forgot something on this one too. Okay, so actually the significance of this is before the New Testament came about, God only spoke through prophets and, say with Moses, the burning bush. And with the birth of Christ, he was actually humanized now and is a person on earth with us. So signifies in here, Jesus is at the center of it. And what this signifies is these are supposed to be the doors to hell or the gates of hell, and that they've been thrust off and that he has saved humanity from it. And so they're put in the cross, and then if you look down, you can see captives and all the devices of torture that would be in the darkness. These are actually, in certain people's opinion, they are supposed to be Adam and Eve, who committed the first sin, and that they are saved by Jesus. And if you look closely, you can see that Jesus is holding on to the people, not the other way around. And so that says that salvation can only be through his strength and not our own. And then the orb around his head just shows his divine righteousness and who he is, and that we have all been saved through him and only him. Yeah. Thank you.